What advice do you give to Western democracies in terms of dealing with the threat of terror?
Well, first of all, when we use the term terror, we have to recognize that, like most terms of political discourse, it has two meanings. There's a literal meaning, and there's the doctrinal meaning. Now, in the literal meaning, terror is what's described in U.S. Code of Laws. It's the threat or use of violence to intimidate, typically against civilians, to intimidate populations for political, ideological, and other ends. Well, nobody can use that definition, because if you use that definition, it follows instantly that the United States is a leading terror state, that Britain is another leading terror state, and so on. So the literal definition, the one that's in the U.S. Code of Laws, is unusable. Then we go to the doctrinal definition, the one that's used in the media and scholarship and so on. That's the same as the official definition, but with a condition, a qualification. It only applies to what they do to us, not what we do to them. Okay, that's the doctrinal meaning. I'll now use it in the doctrinal sense, though that's totally dishonest, of course. As to what to do about the threat of terror in the doctrinal sense, meaning the terror by them against us, there are a lot of things to do. One thing is to not increase the threat. That's a simple step. Don't act in order to increase the threat. Now, the U.S. consistently, and Britain, act in order to increase the threat of terror. Not because they want terror, but because it's just not a high priority. So take the invasion of Iraq. As I mentioned, that was undertaken with the expectation, since amply confirmed, that it would increase the threat of terror. They expected it. It happened. Well, one of the ways not to increase the threat of terror is not to take steps like that that'll increase it. Another, and just about unanimity on this in the among specialists and intelligence agencies, second step is to try to ask what its reasons are. What are the causes of it? And where the causes are grievances that are legitimate grievances, something should be done about those grievances, quite apart from the threat of terror. It's another way to reduce it. But whatever it is, if there are grievances, then something should be done. Beyond that, terror is a police problem. So if you find a terrorist cell, if it's legitimate, yeah, then you should arrest the perpetrators, and they should be subjected to trial, just as the leading terrorists should be, like the ones in the White House. But of course, we're doing it only keeping to the doctrinal sense, so it's only them against us. But there's more to do. What should the United States do about this? Well, actually, there is advice given, recommendations, in the 9/11 Commission report. As you recall, there was an official government commission set up over the strong objections of the Bush administration, but they finally had to agree. There was a commission set up that made recommendations on how to decrease the threat of terror in the United States. Well, one of them had to do with Canada. They concluded that a major threat of terror in the United States is the Canadian border. It's a very long border, practically unprotected, very easy to cross. And they recommended that there be a sharp increase in border patrols on the Canadian border. That's their recommendation. Well, how did the Bush administration respond? It responded by reducing the growth of the border patrol altogether, after 9/11 increase in the border patrol reduced, and shifting it from the Canadian border overwhelmingly to the Mexican border. Okay, so I don't remember the numbers, but I think it's about 10-to-1 by now, per mile of surveillance of the Mexican border and the Canadian border. Well, so they're reducing the efforts to defend the United States from the potential threat of terror from Canada. They're reducing that. Again, another illustration of the fact that protection of the population from terror is just not a high priority. Okay, so for the United States, something else that could be done would be to, say, follow the recommendations of the 9/11 Commission. And there's a lot more. Terror is not coming from nowhere. And what you want to do is, I mean, it's easy to stand up on a pedestal and scream Islamofascism and so on and so forth. Maybe that makes you feel good. But if you want to deal with the threat of terror, you'll ask what its sources are and ask how those sources can be dealt with. I mean, what we call terrorists see themselves as kind of a vanguard who are trying to organize a constituency to support their long-term demands. Now, their long-term demands in the case of, say, jihadi-style terror are pretty clear, and again, there's pretty near unanimity about this in the specialist community. As they put it, their goals are to defend Muslim lands from attack. And they list specific grievances, and the grievances are real. They're trying to mobilize a constituency to join them. Well, the way to deal, there's two ways of dealing with it. One is to ally yourself with Osama bin Laden. That's the way Bush picked. That's why the leading terrorist specialists in the United States, like Michael Scheuer, described Bush as Osama bin Laden's leading ally. Because what he's done is to do exactly what Osama wants, to help the vanguard mobilize the constituency in support of terrorist acts. What is recommended across the board is pay some attention to those reasons, which are real. You can read that in the Defense Science Board recommendations, in academic scholarship, and intelligence reports. Pay attention to the grievances. And many of them are real. And they should be dealt with quite apart from the threat of terror. That can reduce the threat of terror. And we know that it works. I mean, take, say, Northern Ireland. Okay, for a long time, the British reaction to terror in Northern Ireland, which was pretty serious, practically blew up the British cabinet, all sorts of things. Their reaction was just to increase the violence. Okay, that's the Bush line. You join with the terrorists and you're their ally. It's exactly what the more militant sectors of the IRA wanted. So you get an escalating terror and repression cycle. Finally, the British got into their heads that they should pay some attention to the grievances that are the source of it. And in fact, they began to do so because the grievances were real. The constituency was being mobilized around real grievances. When they began to do that, the threat of terror declined. Belfast is not utopia, but it's a very different place from, say, when my wife and I visited in 1993, which was a pretty scary place. It's not that anymore. It's much improved, and in fact, the threat of IRA terror has now been very much marginalized by doing the sensible thing, paying attention to the source out of which it grows. And the same is true in this case.